All right, so good evening, everyone. Doing the brush fire 2024. I was thinking how many, I think this is the third or fourth one this year. We got one more to go. So our final one is going to be our final seminar for the year is going to be Monday, February 24th, where we're going to talk about the title is High Point or High Risk. But basically, what we're going to talk about is using our aerial or tower ladder as a high point, which is a very debated topic in the fire service. So we're going to get into the math of that, the physics of that, not just, you know, analytics or narratives, if you will. But tonight, and I didn't realize this, Mike pointed it out to me, we talked about floods last time, and now we're getting into brush fires, and those two usually don't go together. So, um, thank you all for joining us. We're recording it. It'll be on YouTube after. Mike Kronick is our guest speaker this evening. So in a minute, I'm going to let him introduce himself. But first, I'm going to make him feel very old because he was where I met him was teaching my firefighter one class. So I think he was a lieutenant in Westport at the time. And now here we are. So without further ado, for those of you that have never joined us before, I have the chat window here. So if there are any questions, generally what works out best is to just put them in the chat window and then I can insert them where needed. Um, and that's about it. So without further ado, Mike, take it away. You're muted, you're muted, you're muted. Oh, still muted. We did do a check. Nope, muted. The good news is we don't hear the kids screaming in the background, so I can kind of hear you, but I think can you turn up the mic somehow or no? Nah, now you're definitely muted. No, I mean I can't really hear you now. I can hear that you're talking, but we'll get it. I apologize, guys. We'll get this going in 1 minute. Crystal clear before, of course. No, not like it was before. Might just have to live with the kids in the background.
Okay, Dan, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. I don't know why. It's something with the headset. Sorry
All
about
right.
that.
Don't worry about it. My kids might scream too, so we'll get through it together.
It's more the furnace when it kicks on in the
Ah, come on. All
Oh,
good.
and thanks, Dan, for inviting me, and thanks for making me feel old. So, Mike, my name is Mike Kronick. I'm the retired fire chief out of Westport. I did 24 years, 11 months, 15 days with the town of Westport, and I retired to take a job as the fire control officer for DEP Forest Fire, covering Western District. It had been a job that I had been having my eye on for years, and I just had good alignment of time, age, and able to retire to go take this job. Um, the job is essentially I am in some parts of the United States it would be called a fire management officer. Here in the Northeast, we call it a fire control officer. My job is to represent the state of Connecticut and manage forest fire issues, primarily on state lands, but also help the municipalities. our mission is kind of twofold. It's really as much as about fire management, it's helping the fire departments be trained and ready to handle these fires on their own because the state can't maintain or supply enough people to fight our worst case fires. So that's kind of my job in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I know we talked last week and we talked about what we were going to discuss tonight. So just so all of you guys out there kind of know, we wanted to, I mean, you just covered the first part, which is what is your job? And then really wanted to discuss why was this year different than other years? And then we're going to get into some of the, the minutia of tactics and the large scale of the incident command structure of these large fires. And then finally talk about what can I do for next year, right? We were totally unprepared. I'm saying, not me specifically or a department specifically, but they were very much unprepared this year. What can we do to be prepared for next year, both training, equipment, PPE, those types of things. So I think that's
So,
kind of the goal tonight.
all right. So, you know, the best way to explain it is so I left Westport and I started working for the state May 15th of 23, and it literally started raining. And when you start framing why did we have fires now and not like last year or in previous years? First of all, 2023 was the third wettest year in Connecticut history. And up until August 18th, when I know you guys talked a lot about it at your last seminar, we had the flooding in central Fairfield and New Haven counties. We were still on track to being the second wettest year in 130 years here with 2024. And then flooding happened and literally the rain stopped. And it's my understanding, and we have a hard time pinning down the record because it depends on which weather station you look at, but we had 45 days without rain. And that's a long time to not have rain. And according to one stat we saw, it hadn't been that dry since 1871 in Connecticut, or hadn't been that long without rain since 1871. And if anybody knows a little bit about fire history, 1871 in October is when we had the Great Chicago Fire. And the irony is that was not the largest or most devastating fire that particular fall or that day. And it was a series of major wildfires that burned from basically the Great Lakes into northern New England. And that was a really kind of a high water mark for wildfire in the eastern part of the United States. So why was this year particularly bad is what we had was a saturation of starts that overwhelmed the local resources. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but what we had is we had so many fires starting that we did not have enough people to continually keep responding. And a good example with that would be the day that the fire in Berlin broke out, the Hawthorne fire, which was Monday, the 21st of October. I had already been on the road that day, or actually, I had been on the road since Sunday the 19th at 10 o'clock at night, taking fire responses, responded all through the night, all through Monday, was at the fire in Berlin until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And we were still receiving calls for additional help, people looking for help at other fires across the state of Connecticut. And a lot of these fires are taxing us because it's been a long time. Our last busy season here in Connecticut would have been 1999, and we had quite a few fires in 1999. But what had happened is they weren't all at once, and they were spaced out enough that both the state and the fire departments were able to respond to handle them. Fast forward to the year 2024, we all know that the volunteer fire departments are having trouble with recruitment and retention and keeping up the numbers like they used to. But that's not a unique situation with the volunteer fire departments. The state of Connecticut, specifically the agency of DEEP, we're two-thirds smaller of an agency than we were in 1999. And oh, by the way, of the 900-ish people that are still working for the agency, 300 of them work in an agency, a division within the agency called Pura that spends all their time regulating your electric and gas bills, and they don't come out to fight fire. So we have a lot less people today fighting fire. So what we had was an alignment of a flash drought, the need. an alignment of starts. The weather was aligning up for fire behavior to be a challenge, and all of a sudden we've got the recipe for a disaster. Hope that makes sense for
Yeah.
everybody.
No, just because it rains a lot doesn't mean that if it hasn't rained in 10, 15, 20 days that you're not going to have dry brush. And plus it's in the fall, so you have all the leaves that have fallen and dried out. And I don't know if it was a specific issue in Connecticut, but I know it certainly played a part out west in California, the wind, as much, and we're not going to get into the politics of anything of water and that stuff. But if you have a 100-mile-an-hour wind, there's really nothing you're going to do.
No, you can't. And I've been doing national responses for 24 years, and I have not seen 100-mile-an-hour winds on fires I've been on. I've been on fires where it's gotten pretty windy and things get dicey. But, even here in Connecticut this fall, we had a lot of windy days. So, it's the low relative humidity, the wind, and you have a start. Yeah, the fires are going to move. Where we were fortunate is most of the fires we caught quick, and I think you look at years past, the proliferation of cell phones. I mean, a fire that doesn't get reported in 10 minutes, that's because everybody's standing around videotaping it. But the reality is, we're getting these fires really quick. So quick, although, kind of a little side story, we did have a fire that had popped in Torrington on the Torrington Litchfield line in early November. Um, that we got it first before the Torrington Fire Department, and how we found out about the fires. The three of the towers, fire towers that are still staffed in Massachusetts, picked up the fire, and they were having a hard time cross-referencing it. And two of the towers were saying it was in Litchfield, and one was saying in Torrington. And I'm like, well, it's got to be on the line then.
Right.
And so we're still using that technology, but the reality is most of these fires get picked up pretty quick because somebody sees it.
So one of the things we talked about, which I found fascinating, we're going to get into PPE and the incident command and all that. Maybe I'm jumping ahead to that. But you kind of made the statement like from structural, it's the first, so goes the first line, so goes the fire, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
and I think there probably are brush fires out there where if you can get a quick line on it and get some water on it, you're probably good. But that's not what we were finding this fall. And so you talked a lot about, and the Hawthorne fire is just a good case study. It's not a they did right, they did wrong, or any of that, but it's a good case study because it's a it's just a huge incident that kind of illustrates a lot of what we talk what can be talked about in the wildland setting. And so talk a little bit about, showing up and saying, all right, I got this with booster water, or, and keep call the big thing you talked about was that the first line, and also keep calling a mutual aid versus let's back up and figure out what's going on. And not, this isn't even, if anyone's listening, we're not talking about specifically the Hawthorne fire, but just those types of incidents in general. And in all fairness, I have no freaking idea what you're talking about. So take it away.
So, because I've worn a lot of different hats.
Absolutely.
And one of them is I was and am still part of the statewide mutual aid plan, which responds to large scale disasters and helps support the local fire departments in ensuring they have a lot of resources. What I was doing, especially the Monday before, and it's good advice for all wildfires, is be mindful about over-resourcing your fire very early on. And it sounds counterintuitive because when we're going to a building fire, and I got my first couple of weeks on the job as an assistant chief years ago, I had a reputation of like, oh, it's second alarm chronic, just because if I knew I was going to have everybody on the line, everybody responding on the first alarm was going to be committed into an IDLH atmosphere, I would strike a second alarm, knowing that I needed to put people on the bench. The difference when we're going to a wildfire event is there's no front door, there's no second floor, and there's no grab to be made. And really, the reality is we're looking to contain the fire. And I'm going to tell you guys a dirty little secret. It's kind of okay if the woods burn, because if given the opportunity, we put a lot of fire on the ground to burn the woods intentionally. So what we have a tendency to do on wildfire responses is we see a lot of fire. We think we need a lot of people and fire trucks. So we have a tendency to over-resource them. And to the point of we've had fires in Connecticut, and one that comes to mind, it was out in Eastern Connecticut at Devil's Hop Yard years ago, where the state fire plan assisted the local fire department and they brought 39 tankers in, and it was they were never going to use that much water on wheels, but you have that many fire trucks showing up to the scene, and they're jamming up everything from traffic to they're just in the way, and they're not part of the game at that point. So just it's one of those things, it does sound counterintuitive, but you're better off showing up with a couple people, determine, what values at risk. And from here in Connecticut, we do have a lot of values at risk, and it's going to be homes. But the reality is, let the get on scene, do a quick size up, and then determine what you need for people and resources. And then one of the things I was doing the morning of the Hawthorne fires, I was calling all the county coordinators, telling them, hey, today we're going to have a big fire. Let's not over-resource it, because let's get a good game plan before we get engaged. And the last county I was on the phone with was Hartford County, and they were already on that fire when I was showing up. So
Kind of back up a little bit. I don't know if there's a technical difference. We use the terms interchangeably. Brush fire, wildfire. Like, at what point does it cross from like, hey, maybe I do need a couple more engines and I can put a line on this and be good, to a wildfire of the scenario that you just talked about?
you know, so there it's an interchangeable term.
Yeah.
And so when we go out west, if I said brush fire, they're thinking, something small, whereas here we're thinking it's something big. If I said wildfire here, people are like, I don't know if he's talking about, or a forest fire. The term is interchangeable. Here in New England, we call it a brush fire. Sometimes we'll call it a forest fire, but rarely do we use the term wildfire. It's not that we don't use it. It's just I shouldn't say we don't use it. It's not that it's
No,
not
I
part of our
mean,
vocabulary, if that makes sense.
no, without a doubt. You hear the terms interchangeably, so I didn't know if there was a set like, oh, well, when it passes this point, now it's considered a wildfire or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so, all right, so we went through a lot of that stuff. So the incident command side, right? Because this isn't even whether you're calling in a lot of resources or little resources, this was a multi-day event. So how do you, I guess, twofold. How does Deep help, and how do you manage a multi-day event like this? A chief can't stay up for 4 days. So,
Sure, you can. You can
oh,
try. Have been there, done that.
fair
So,
enough.
so how does Deep help?
How does Deep? I think that's the biggest thing because, like before, everyone knows Deep from Hazmat, and I never heard of a Western, brush fire coordinator, wildfire coordinator. So we're gonna get into 2025 in a little bit, but how many of you are there, and how can you help if an incident strikes?
Okay, so the kind of the irony is our system, our program is currently fully staffed, which is a big shock. We're back up to our authorized strength. We haven't been in this position in almost 25 years, which is not a good situation. So there's four fire control officers. Two of us are assigned geography wise, east and west, and we're responsible for working with the local fire departments and training them and kind of managing the district as far as fire. And the district is roughly the Connecticut River. Connecticut River from the Massachusetts line to Middletown, Middlefield, Durham, Guilford are in the east. Everything else is in the west. And I cover the Western District. Rich Shank, who's also happens to be the chief of the Hampton Fire Department, volunteer fire department in Eastern Connecticut, is the Eastern District. And then there are two other fire control officers that are assigned specifically programs, everything from our rural fire protection grants, managing our training and records that we need to maintain to do national response. And then the other fire control officer handles what they call community wildfire protection grants and some mitigation programs. The What's kind of interesting is I got in front of me my notes from a meeting that I was at on September 12th, and we had our new fire supervisor who's responsible for supervising the four of us and kind of leading our effort. He didn't start until September 20th of this year. So he actually kind of came into basically a new job, and then like the rest of us got punched in the teeth real hard with a fall fire season that was kind of caught us all off guard. Um, I hope that answered your question, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, so how can you help? 2025 comes around, we'll talk about the preparations, but hey, I show up and I can't put this out with, well, I guess that's the first question. When does a department say this is more than I can handle and I need to call in, I need to notify you and get some advice here?
Okay, so I kind of frame it like this, and for any of you, the guys that are military buffs, I would say our mission is kind of similar to U.S. Special Forces, like the Green Berets. My job is to show up, either train you to fight your own fire or convince you you can fight your own fire so I can leave to go fight the next. That's kind of our core mission as far as our response.
Right?
I do have the ability to bring staff to fight fires. During our traditional fire season, we have seasonal firefighters that do work for us. Last year, we only had three of them. Some years we'll have six. It depends on
But not
money.
a lot.
No, it's not a lot, but so I do have some people, and then I rely heavily on my parks staff. So Deep is a pretty big agency, and I think people are always shocked at how much it does. Here in this group, I'm pretty sure everybody understands how they have the emergency response unit, which is the hazmat guys. And it's more than just the emergency response unit as far as the hazmat guys. There's a whole like big bureau of hazmat people, but then there's the fish and the wildlife and the foresters and the parks people. And then there are, we've got NCON officers. There's, like I said, there's quite a few people working for the agency.
But are they trained or are they just manpower?
So we do train them. So
Okay.
everybody in parks is required to be, and it's part of their contractual requirements, that they get trained to fight wildfire. That being said, there's not as many maintainers as they used to be. And currently, I think a third of the positions that they're authorized are vacant because people really don't want to work hard for a living and let alone work hard in a park for a living.
Mhm.
So it's a challenge to keep those positions, one, staffed for the state, and then two, on top of it, you're always training new people and new people. We also talked about my last real bad fire season was 1999. That's a long time ago now. That's, 25 years plus. There's not that many people left currently
Oh,
working for the agency that were here that year. And when you start taking that into account, I had a lot of people that were trained. This year was the first year they actually saw fires. So that's like my first wave is I
yeah.
rely on my agency people, and I have a lot of people. I can bring bear about 100 people
Okay.
statewide in a crisis to fight fire pretty quickly.
Now,
And then,
real quick, talk about this fall because I know that who'd you
well,
have here this fall?
well, we'll talk about that. Let me finish
Okay.
about our, so then
Please
our
go
our
ahead.
next tier people down is our Connecticut Interstate Wildfire Crew, which is what I was a part of for the 22 years before I became a state employee. And that's a mix of people from the agency and from the municipal fire departments across Connecticut, and actually a couple people who are not even affiliated with fire departments that just kind of fell into it. And that's an additional between like 65 and 100 people on top of some state people already that are highly trained and were red carded and qualified at the national level to fight wildfire. And we have people that range from, hey, I can pick up a shovel and dig handline firefighter type twos to I got a couple divisions, people who are qualified division supervisors and incident commander type fours at the national level. So we do have quite a few people to come and fight fire. It just the reflex time is always the
Yeah,
challenge because we're
absolutely.
not sitting in a fire station, and the reality is it takes a day or two to muster a full crew out. So
Okay.
uh, so
And
we have that, and we do have equipment and materials, and people, some people don't understand that, and we're kind of actually even surprised this fall when they saw a lot of our own equipment out. So statewide, we have 12 engines. Mostly are Type 6 engines, which are brush trucks, which everybody want to hear should know what a brush truck looks like. It's usually most of our stuff is either on a Chevy or Ford, or on Chevy, Ford, and Dodge chassis, crew cab, most of them. 200 gallons of water. They have a pump, booster line, hose, hand tools, equipment, and we have a whole bunch of them that are set up for national response. And then I have four Type 4 engines, which are uh, all-wheel drive Freightliners and Chevrolets that are usually about 800 to 1,000 gallon tank and proportionally more equipment. Surprisingly, one of my engines had come back from Wyoming on a Wednesday. Friday went into the shop. I needed it Monday, and they're like, you can't have it. It needs new tires. So they had to have tires rushed to put on it Monday so I could have it out the door to fight fires on Tuesday. So we went from a busy supporting national operations all summer long season to a busy
Yeah.
season here. And I think people, don't understand the amount of effort it takes to fight these fires anywhere in the United States, and that all the states pull their people and resources together to support the federal operations because it's you can't have 4,000 firefighters waiting in Southeast Oregon to fight a fire that may not materialize any one given year. So you got to assemble those people and resources.
So on that note, what resources came into Connecticut for the wildfire season? And then we'll get onto some of the tactics, PPE, and preparing for 2026 or five.
So what was kind of unique is the Connecticut is part of what they call the Northeast Forest Fire Protection Compact, which is a basically a mutual aid organization that supports wildfire response, and it covers all of New England, New York State, Quebec, and the maritime provinces of Canada. And actually, FDNY is an agency upon itself member of the organization. And that's kind of our local mutual aid group. So that's the people we go to first to looking for help before we go to the national system. So early on that, so we had the fire break out in Berlin on a Monday. Tuesday morning, we already knew we were having a hard time. We were trying to get people all day Monday to muster it up to fight fire. We did have a lot of people show up Tuesday morning to help. The fire departments are getting people out the door to help fight fires, but we knew that we were getting more fires than we could handle even that Tuesday morning. So we started looking for resources outside. And what we had was Rhode Island and New Hampshire stepped up immediately on that Tuesday morning and each provided an engine with 4 firefighters to us rather quickly, which Rhode Island was in the same boat as us, but they knew that they needed to send help because we already had big fires going on. In New Hampshire, their northern end and was still slow and kind of wet, so they were able to pull an engine from way up north in the Conway district and send help down. We also asked for the helicopters, and we went right through our standard operating procedures, which have been signed all the way off by up to the Commissioner of Deep and have been reviewed by all the other agencies that would be part of a major response. And we requested a Black Hawk and a Chinook right away from the National Guard. And we had a little bit of friction, and there was a little hesitation, on whether they could or couldn't. And the backstory there is I kind of got the impression like that one of the officers from the Army National Guard was like, well, what if war breaks out tomorrow afternoon and we really need those helicopters back? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. There's no other game in town this week, guys. Get in. And they were kind of stonewall us that they weren't really that interested in supporting it. So we said, cool, we're going to go and see if we can get a helicopter from the Maine Rangers. And the state of Maine was absolutely like, yes, you're getting a helicopter. And they sent down a helicopter with 2 pilots, 2 helicopter crew members who are basically qualified wildland firefighters that are specially trained to work on and off a helicopter. And they also sent down a somebody who was a qualified air branch director because they knew we had asked the state for helicopters, and what they needed was to make sure that they had somebody on the ground that knew not only how to manage their own helicopter, but how to manage other helicopters in a larger operation. So we had those assets coming in and they were in real quick. And that kind of bought us a couple days to kind of get our head on, figure out where everything was going on and kind of start putting our game plan together. And as time progressed, we realized we needed more and more people because as additional fires broke out, I still have to staff existing fires that were still working. And what people don't realize, and this is one of the, challenges that comes with all this is everybody thinks the fire's out and they walk away and then it starts up again and they're like, oh, it's a new fire. No, no, it's the same fire. It just needs to be monitored. So what we end up calling out is a patrol status. So we have new initial attack fires that we're dealing with. We have extended attack operations that are going on for days or even weeks on a fire. And then we go into a mop up and patrol status on the older fires. And we'll patrol some fires. And some of these fires that happened in Connecticut were patrolled for 3 to 4 weeks before we were confident they were out fully. So every day we're moving, we're picking up new fires. Our forces are getting spread thinner and thinner. So we called in for a hand crew. Actually, we called in for crews, and our first two crews to come in were one out of the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire, and then the second one was out of Quebec. So we got them pretty quick. We also brought in the New York FDNY incident management team because we need to have not only accountability of we can handle the operations, but we need to have planning for the next operational period, which includes accountability of where everybody is, what they're doing, building a comm plan. We need to have the logistics section, which makes sure we have the materials and fuel and food for everybody is moving forward. And more importantly, and I know I see a couple names here that I know are fire chiefs. Um, at some point, you want to get reimbursed, and we knew pretty quickly we were going to be getting FEMA money for all this. We will have to have the finance admin unit, and so we had that come in to help us box up that. And as time progressed, we kept calling in for more and more resources. And as I'm looking down, not only did we call in Quebec, we had people and resources coming in from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. We had, as time went on, we ended up with the Groverland Hot Shots, which are out of Southern California. They're basically headquartered just outside the Yosemite National Park. They're a U.S. Forest Service asset. We actually brought in a contract logging crew, was all we could get our hands on when we got into November. And that's Miller Logging out of Idaho. And they came out with a crew. But we also had a lot of people who are single resource or overhead positions that were division soup, safe division supervisor qualified, safety officer, task force leader. And we had a lot of people come out of the El Dorado National Forest, come out of Arizona Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Florida. So we brought in a lot of people, and I think at the height we probably had close to 100 people from out of state coming in to help Connecticut, which was
Yeah.
pretty new for Connecticut. We had called in for help once on a fire that was in Connecticut, but we brought in like it was 10 firefighters from Rhode Island, and it was more of an exercise to see if we could get the system to work. And oh, by the way, they happened to be doing their refresher training that day. So instead of doing sitting in a classroom, they came out and helped us fight fire.
So was I mean, as many resources as you say, 100 people, that made a huge difference.
Yes,
Yeah. So
it
get
did.
get you guys involved early. So it's wild. So
You
uh
know,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and one of the things is, and people will get upset. I'm sure there's some people who are going to get upset, and I think the best way to frame it is FDNY is very good at fighting high-rise fires. I think that's generally speaking, you guys are trained, got the equipment prepared, kind of know what's going to happen. If you did it every day, all summer long, or all year
Right.
long, you
Yep.
guys would be spectacular at it. If I start bringing in a shot crew, and here's a good example, if I bring in a 24-person hot shot crew from Southern California that had been on fire every day all summer, and it's their job and they do it every year, do we think they're probably pretty good at fighting
Yeah.
wildfire? Yeah. But if I send them to a high-rise fire, they have no idea what they're doing.
I always
Uh,
say, someone asked me to draft, I'm going to think that we were supposed to drive really close behind the rig in front of us, you know?
yeah.
So 100%.
So when I say that
Yeah.
is so me bringing in a 24, a hotshot crew of 24, they could probably do the ground pounding work of 100 municipal firemen in Connecticut. And I don't mean to be,
No,
putting off some people with that, but these are people who that's what they do every day. They step off the truck just like we do when we're going to force a door on a front door of a house. They got the tools in hand, they're ready to work. Their job is to cut trees and dig line. They don't even pick up hose. Like that's like, no, we don't do that. Their job is to absolutely just pound out line.
like a rescue company,
Yeah.
basically.
So, you talk about that, 100 people of which, that are got a higher skill set for this particular fire problem
Yeah.
makes it a lot easier. And I think that's hard for some of the people to understand, but that is the situation.
But I think the other thing to understand is it's not like you pick up the phone and they're going to be there in a couple hours, right? So
No, and the Groverland Hot Shots is a good example because they ended up working for me for about 5 days. We picked them up. They were 12 hours away from end of the year and pink slips when they took our resource order. And they were actually on a fire in Nevada. They were getting ready to demobilize and head to their home unit. They were going to have a day off, have their end of season last day, turn in all their equipment, and basically have their end of year party. When we called it, we put in a resource order through our dispatch center. And so we should talk a little about that. They picked up that resource order and said, we'll take the job. They're in Nevada. They got to drive to Connecticut with all their equipment and all their trucks. It takes them a few days. So that reflex time can be a lot. And I know what it's like being on the sending end. It's hard when it's on the receiving end because the fires are still burning and you're still
Right.
responding.
So yeah, give me a couple of minutes on what you just talked about, calling in the resources, and then we'll get into like the PPE and that stuff.
Yeah. So we don't have like the world of wildfire doesn't have a traditional like 911 center or dispatch center that you and I and everybody here is familiar with where, you dial 911 and within 3 to 5 minutes, a fire truck's on the road and heading to you. Our state dispatch center is the deep dispatcher. It's the same person that handles the hazmat calls. It's the same person you call when you say there's a bear breaking into your house, and they actually handle all the Department of Motor Vehicle uh, Department of Motor Vehicle law enforcement dispatches, and the deep dispatch actually dispatches everything that doesn't go to the state police ends up in our dispatch center. So they handle a lot of different stuff. So they don't have the time to go and track and find a resource for us. So what they'll do is they call one of the fire control officers, and then it's my job to say, "Oh, we show up. Yes, it's a fire. I'm going to need more and more people." My next up dispatch center is actually the dispatch center in New Hampshire, and that's the Northeast Forest Fire Protection Compact's regional dispatch center. So all those states and provinces that I talked about, that's who we all go to when we start needing help beyond our local operations. If they can't get it from within the compact, then we refer that to the Eastern Area Dispatch Center, which is actually in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If they don't have any resources available, then they pump it all the way up to NIFC, the National Interagency Fire Coordination Center in Boise, Idaho. And that's the National Dispatch Center. So it takes a couple hops to get to that center. And then once it gets to Boise, they have a huge dispatch center that basically tracks all the resources nationally that are available or still on the clock to be deployed. And then they will call down to that specific dispatch center. The same way I had a call up, they've got to call down to find if that resource is still available. So just even saying, hey, I need something, and somebody giving me confirmation, hey, you're getting the Groverland hot shots, that might take 4 to 6 hours.
Wow, that's wild. So again, it's just not you're not just calling mutual aid, it's long term.
Yes.
So let's get into some of the we got a lot of the broad strokes, meat and potatoes. What is some of the equipment that works really well? What is some of the equipment that was hindrances? Some of the notes that I know we've talked about that again, you talk to municipal firefighters versus wildland or brush firefighters, um, leaf blowers, SCBA, turnout gear, uh, the different types of hose or PPE, ATVs, UTVs, all of that stuff. Not that we expect departments to go out and buy everything to do that, but what's like the big stuff that you see out there?
So let's start with just overall PPE.
PPE? Okay.
Yeah. You know, uh, you got to wear something, and each agency is going to have a different level of what their something is. Um, at the minimum, you got to wear a helmet. Something falls and hits you, it hurts. And having been there, done that, and gotten a T-shirt that says "I got hit by a tree," it hurts. Got to wear a helmet, and if you're wearing a helmet, wear the eye protection because if you get poked in the eye going through the woods, you can't see nothing, and you end up being just a hindrance. Um, so head protection, eye protection.
But the helmet does not need to be a structural
No,
fire.
it does not. And it probably shouldn't be because I'm going to be honest, after a while, and it's been a while since I've worn a structural helmet for any length of time, they get heavy real quick. I mean, they make a good hard hat is meets the minimum standard is all you really need. And it's really, you're just looking for something that's going to protect you from getting hit by something you could survive. If an oak tree, a 30-inch caliper oak tree falls on you, even with a hard hat or a fire helmet on, you're not going to make it. But that being said, you get hit by a branch or, anything like that, you're going to be fine. So they do have a standard. The NFPA standard for wildfire protection gear is, I believe, 1977 or 1975. One of them is the uniform gear, uniform standard. The other one is
Yeah, I think it's gonna get changed. It's gonna
what they
roll
are.
into the 2500 or
Yeah,
something.
they're
It is
making it.
out there, yeah.
I know. Uh, so we wear a Nomex shirt and Nomex pants, an all leather work boot with a Vibram sole, leather gloves. If you were wearing that, you're going to be fine out on any forest fire 99.75% of the time. Our agency does require us to carry a fire shelter, even on fires here in Connecticut. Um, we have never thought about, and I don't anticipate that as being a requirement for fire departments in Connecticut. It's just that's cost prohibitive. The fire shelters, I think, are up almost $700 now. That could get real expensive real fast for something that most of the firefighters in Connecticut will never, one, need to use, and two, there's annual training that's required, not unlike the bailout systems that everybody's using.
Just tell them to carry they can just carry the EV blankets they're all buying anyway. So
It's not unlike that. They're a little bit folded up nicer. So you do need to wear something. The challenges I've seen is that I was on a fire this fall, where as I was doing my size up and I came around the head of the fire and I'm with another wildland firefighter. We met a group of firefighters that were working this fire already, and they ranged in apparel from shorts and t-shirts to I did see two firefighters wearing full structural gear with air packs, and they were nowhere near any buildings, and they were about 2,500 feet away from their engines. That it's just too much weight. It's not that you couldn't wear that stuff. It's just if you're moving and hiking and getting out after these fires and trying to be quick, all that material is just extra weight that's dragging you down, and it's going to cause you to overheat too quick, and you're not going to be flexible and nimble enough to climb, and you're just going to be slow and cumbersome.
but let's also be realistic, right? So most departments obviously issue turnout gear. Um, so if they say, all right, I understand, Mike, turnout gear is not the right option. What's my cheapest way into a wild? I don't even call it a wildland setup, but like what are you talking about? How much are they talking about for some boots and a
Well, so if you and I would say,
and
and
we
this is
talked about this, so I'm setting you up,
yeah.
the
Oh, I know. So buying a wildland set of PPE is not cheap either. You're probably going to be into it for $750 for a pant and a shirt. You still got to buy the boots. What I would recommend is look, if you, a lot of fire departments are buying uniforms for the career and volunteer fire departments have uniforms. I know that Long Hill started giving out uniforms recently, and you see a lot of the other volunteer fire departments are wearing uniforms for regular duty work. Make sure you're buying a station compliant uniform, pant, and shirt. If you're doing that, you're so close to the NFPA standard also for wildfire, you're gonna be fine. What you're looking to do is wear something, one, that's going to protect you from hiking through the woods, and two, if you do get close to the fire, it's helping you shield you from radiant heat without melting on you, if that makes sense. The reality is up until I want to say it was like 1980, even the US Forest Service was like a lot of people wearing blue jeans, so you're wearing something all cotton that's not combustible, you'll be fine also. What you really want to stay away from is anything that's synthetic, polyesters, rayons, the nice golf shirts that all everybody wears in the fire service now that are all, rayon this with a lot of embroidering. Stay away from that stuff or the Under Armour. But if you're wearing a cotton long sleeve t-shirt and blue jeans, have a good pair of work boots, have your helmet, gloves, and some eye protection, you're pretty solid and going to be fine.
Okay. So that's PPE. Um,
Oh, while we're talking about
yeah,
PPE,
please, no.
no, and this kind of goes on PPE slash equipment. Uh, Everybody can start a chainsaw, but doesn't make you a
Oh,
lumberjack.
yes, we talked about this.
You know, and this is, something that I've been out teaching. And one of the things I do for the job is I go out and do a whole program for the fire departments to kind of get them to be able to respond and act and take good action on a fire. And I bring it up does your fire department have chaps with a chainsaw? And a lot of fire departments don't, which is kind of shocking, and which leads me to believe our OSHA inspectors really don't know the OSHA code that well. Because if I saw a chainsaw on a fire truck, I would expect there to be at least one pair of chaps. And I don't think I've ever seen the OSHA inspector show up and say, "Hey, where are your chaps?" But they're going to protect you. And what people don't understand is chainsaw injuries are unforgiven. The good news is, I would imagine most of the people that are in this program tonight have done the stop the bleed classes so that at least they know how to stop the bleeding once the chainsaw has been done its damage. But chainsaws are going to hurt. They can kill you.
I have a 10-inch scar on my shin from one. So not at
Oh,
work,
yes.
but
Listen,
yep,
I'm setting you up.
100%. So I mean
So,
the 10-inch scar on my leg, the 10-inch scar on my face. So I've learned my lesson a couple times, but
So
sure.
on top of it, and this is something I say to people who are chief officers all the time now is, oh, so you're not going to buy chaps. So when the firefighter gets caught and he's in the hospital, you're paying the workman's comp, the lost time, all that. And oh, you have to buy a $2,500 pair of pants because the
Right.
structural pants that the municipal fire departments wear, that those aren't designed to stop a chainsaw.
No.
And that's something that, you think of all the times, and I've done it multiple times. I was assigned to a truck company for years, getting up on a roof and cutting with a chainsaw and not even ever thinking about that crossing my mind. But now that I do it, do saw work a little bit for my living, oh yeah, I think about it all the time.
Yeah,
If I
no, absolutely with that. And listen, I mean, we've talked, everyone's talked about it. You know, the current generation of newer firefighters don't have the same, and not that I had it when I started, mechanical aptitude of having used these things, and we're putting them, these tools, and we're putting them up on roofs and saying, all right, start this chainsaw. But even still, just in the woods and stuff like that, without a doubt. So chaps definitely a big one. Um, Hose. Should I be buying special hose?
Yes, so we do have a hose spec that we recommend, and generally speaking, what we want is single jacketed forestry hose, 100-foot lengths, uh, national standard thread. The state does have a spec. We recommend, I think it's, bear with me a second, Mercedes Force Guard 2, white, 100-foot length. Um, that's what we've been buying for Connecticut for the last 8 years, and we'll probably be buying going forward. A lot of places used to buy weeping hose. I think that was just really crappy hose
Okay.
that people sold off,
As we think.
thinking it would work. It didn't.
So I was gonna ask that. So this hose
It
doesn't.
doesn't.
Okay.
No, it doesn't weep, and it never. The reality is, if you drag your hose through the fire and leave it there, yes, it is going to burn up. And
Okay.
we burn up a lot of hose every year, even when we're not having busy fire seasons. It's just the nature of the beast. Um, so
What's
there's
single
that
jacket getting you? Just the flexibility and lightweight.
flexibility and lightweight. So basically, a 100-foot roll weighs about half of what a 50-foot roll of double jacketed hose
Okay.
weighs. So the reality is work hard, smarter, not harder. I could carry much more weight. I can carry much
Much
more
more
hose for the
hose.
same amount of weight. Can you use your structural hose? Yes, but it's going to be harder to move and
Yeah.
just get it up into the woods.
And what GP? I mean, if you know what GPM are we putting out of this? Like what's our goal? We're not doing 150 gallons a minute. So
No,
what?
we're looking for a few gallons a minute. It's
Literally, if like
yeah, we're looking for, to be honest, if you're getting 10 gallons a minute at the nozzle
okay,
at a brush fire, you're doing pretty good.
okay,
Uh, it's a big difference. We're not fighting a confined room and contents fire, that's putting out a few megawatts of energy, of heat release and
hmm
energy that we're trying to overwhelm. This is like look, we're just looking to get this little bit of a flaming front down and move along.
Okay.
Just a few gallons a minute is all we need.
I think that's important to point out because again, a lot of people have, all right, I need 100 gallons a minute or, whatever. I'm using my car fire line, so I need 100 gallons a minute or whatever the case may be. So,
Well, and here's how to frame it. So if I go out with a brush truck, a Type 6 engine with 250 gallons of water, that 250 gallons of water should last me 2 to 3 hours of fighting fire,
okay.
generally speaking.
Okay.
People are probably like, what? No, because you're
I
not
I
spraying
am.
water the whole time. You're kind of moving along,
Yeah.
putting out fire as you go, and it's very rare that you're constantly on the fire's edge putting fire out.
So talk to me about ATVs and not probably more UTVs. Those are the big things you see departments buying a lot of them for, patient removal, back country or backwoods rescue. But do they have a place in Connecticut for wildfires? What is their place? Is it troop transport or should you put a skid unit on it? What's your opinion on that?
Um, so this is what I'm going to say is my opinion, but it's also a reflection of
Without
my
a doubt.
current agency and previous agencies I have. Um, as handy as they are, they're incredibly dangerous. So, we should take a moment to realize that we did lose a firefighter here in Connecticut this year on a wildfire, and that was on an ATV. That being said, are they a handy tool? Absolutely. Do I need them to be equipped with lights and siren and running them full throttle up and down roads to get to these fires? Probably not. Um, where they're handy is not getting necessarily, how should I say this? They can go a lot of places, but the reality is you can't go everywhere with them. And, one thing to keep in mind is I've seen people taking these UTVs into locations that uh, they probably shouldn't have been going to. And the way I always would say it is like if you wouldn't take an off-roading Jeep to a location, what makes you think you can get the UTV there? You can't. And that's, they can only go so far. And let's be honest, Connecticut is not a mountainous state, but we do have some pretty rugged terrain. And some of these places that people I've seen trying to get in UTVs into, they're asking for a lot of trouble and saw a lot of close calls this fall. Where the UTVs are really handy is if you can get around and drive around the perimeter of fire and you have it set up where you have somebody driving it and then the other person can have a short length of hose where they're holding the nozzle in the passenger seat and they can drive the fire, drive along the fire's edge, constantly putting water on it to stop the forward progress. That's where the machine becomes very handy as a tool. And then where it also comes in handy is afterwards, the fire is contained, not only is the fires front been put out, but you actually have a control line around the fire that you can go out and patrol this fire on a regular basis and do spot mop-ups with them. But I think the attempt of a couple of fire departments and a lot of fire departments to use them as like initial attack vehicle, like this is going to be solve all our problems. It's not gonna. It's another tool in the toolbox, and you have to learn how to use it and fit it in where you need it.
Right. And then, so on that note, kind of like water supply, that it's not as important as a structural firefighting, if you will. If you need to go back to fill up your tank and come back, as you said, you're doing 10 gallons a minute, you can last a pretty long time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so water supply, uh, it's not the same. And,
Like you said, 25 tankers is probably not the right.
yeah, no. And I'm going to tell you, we don't need that. 90% of the time, you don't need that many water tenders or tankers moving water. Um, and we've started doing this even with our agency. If we have a fire and we're going to be on for a few days and we need somebody to haul water for us, we will probably put a portable pond on the ground and just have a fire department come by and it's like, hey, can you make sure it's filled at 8, noon, and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we should be all set. They probably can
Wow.
do that much easier than having a constant lineup of tankers showing up all day
Okay.
feeding our system. I think, the effort that some of the fire departments will put on when they have these kind of fires to lay supply lines. And this is the challenge. Wildfire is a moving event. It's not staying in one location. it's one thing if you've got a house burning or a few houses burning. Yeah, you're probably going to need some water supply. Let's get that taken care of. But once the fire's up in the woods and it's moving, have somebody haul water to and from the fire scene. They have time. They don't even need to go lights and siren. But we don't need to be moving thousands of gallons a minute for most of these fires.
Right. Yeah. So you talked a little bit with the ATV, UTV about using it to go around, and you talked about choppers. Drones. How did they play a part? Are they helpful? Do you guys
Yeah.
have them?
So no, we don't.
Okay.
The hazmat people have them, and we can call them for them. But what we did find is that everybody that has a drone seems to show up at the fires for you to help you out.
Right.
So we're pretty
Okay.
fortunate with it. So the challenges we're finding with the drones is, and we had this in Berlin specifically, is everybody wants to zoom in to the like, the flaming, single tree and then turn on the infrared and show you that it's on fire. And the reality is that's why we're here. I know it's on fire. What I'm looking for is the broad, wide view picture. And that's the challenge, is everybody's thinking, treating like the drone use for wildfire similar to what we would do for like we're searching for somebody in the woods, whether it's a
Mhm.
lost person or a suspect. But what we're looking for is that kind of, 10,000-foot view where we're like, whoa, we could see the whole fire. And what we were very fortunate this fall is at the Hawthorne fire in Berlin, Eversource, and Eversource gets a bad rap after storms and disasters and whatnot, but they absolutely stepped up this fall and
Or with
helped
my utility bill, but yeah.
or with your utility bill. But they stepped up and provided a lot of assistance. And what they brought us was one of their crews that uses the drones to check the power lines. And they have, licensed qualified pilots. But what they came with is a big screen TV. So we weren't all huddling around. And what we could do is we had them fly the perimeter of the fire to kind of give us an idea of where we were, what's the terrain. And from a command and control perspective, we want to see where the fires progress during the day. Are our tactics, are we putting our people and tactics in the right spots? So that's where it was very beneficial. The infrared is handy, don't get me wrong, but if I can see it's burning, I know it's burning. It's telling me something I already know that's obvious. Now, on the back end is I will tell you there is emerging technology, and there was a company that was an upstart last year that was familiar with, saw at a conference, and then we saw them again this year at a conference, and they went from, hey, this is a business model we're building to they have 60 contracts in Southern California for fire departments providing basically data analytics and flight. Best way to explain it is they can program the drone to do a flight pattern to take photos and imagery of a wildfire to map it. And they were able to get from, hey, we flew it with a drone to here are the paper maps that show you where the fire is, where all the hot spots are, and it's on a map that shows you the topography, where all the homes are. So the technology is coming along quite quickly, and will probably make some pretty big jumps in the next 3 to 5 years and I would expect that will come all the way up to the northeastern part of the United States, that technology.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm a chief, right? And I say, all right, we were overwhelmed this year a little bit. Or even maybe even better, we weren't overwhelmed, right? Our town didn't get hit. But I'm looking to prepare for this coming year. What are, just like you have a big fire in your McMansion or your, condo in town, you say, wow, that took me back. What can I do to prepare for this coming year?
Um, if there was, so when you talk about equipment wise, the one thing
Both
I can
equipment, training, whatever.
we'll start with equipment
Fine.
because buy a leaf blower and
Okay.
not something at Home Depot or Lowe's. Go to the landscape supply house, get a leaf blower for the fire department. Get one for if you have a brush truck, put a leaf blower on it. If you don't, get a leaf blower. If I haven't said it, get a leaf blower.
So gas, not like
Yes,
your Milwaukee
gasoline.
electric. Okay.
Yeah, stay away from and I don't mean it. There's no environmental or
No.
conspiracy thing going on, but what you're looking for is operational endurance. Um, First of all, if the leaves won't blow because it's wet, they're not going to burn. So we got that side of it covered. If they're dry and they're going to burn, the leaf blower is going to help. And what the leaf blower you're going to do is basically walk the perimeter of the fire, creating your fire line. And in Connecticut, generally speaking, a 2 foot wide fire line is more than enough to stop ground fire from progressing. If you can get around the fire with a leaf blower pretty quick, you're going to keep it contained pretty quick, get it in its box and contain it pretty quickly. We use leaf blowers in our agency all the time. And even this fall, you talk about people that were skeptical. The Groverland hot shots, like, what do you do with these leaf blowers? This is what we do.
Oh,
And all of a
really?
sudden,
Okay.
yeah, even then they were basically running through the woods with leaf blowers within a day.
Now,
But
are you blowing as you walk the perimeter, are you blowing into the fire or away from the fire?
generally speaking, we want to blow the leaves that we're looking to blow away from the fire
Okay.
because what we don't want is a jackpot of fuel right at the fire's edge. So when it gets right to the edge, it's going to blow into a big pile of leaves, take off, and then potentially spot across your line.
Okay.
Fouled on, if you're a suburban, sub-rural, or a rural fire department, you should consider buying some forestry hose. Forestry hose, 300 foot, and in the red bag that we use here in Connecticut, or any kind of bag that you guys want to buy is perfect with a nozzle. Because what you can do then when you talk about every fire department has an engine for the most part. I can't think of any fire departments that really aren't running an engine of any type. You got a pre-connected, hose lay 1 3/4 or 2.5 off the back. You can make your initial attack with your pre-connect. And then when you get to the end of the pre-connect, instead of adding, more structural hose, go to the nozzle, turn it off, or if you're lucky and have a break apart with a bail, take the nozzle off, put your forestry hose, and then start working out with the forestry hose and going out further and further and further. And you look at what most engines have for hose. If you can get 1,500 feet away from an engine pretty quick with between forestry hose and your hose bed on your engines, you're pretty solid. So a little bit of forestry hose is a big help.
Okay.
If you
One, yeah, go. No.
don't, and if you're anybody's still carrying the old school bamboo brooms, get rid of them. But a lot of people still have them.
No, we have them at work. So
Yeah, well, but if there's instructions that are supposed to be given with those, and you're supposed to soak them in water for 3 days before you use them. Nobody ever does.
no,
Uh,
I remember hitting brush with a dry broom. So
yeah,
I'm with
it's handy to spread the fire,
you.
uh, but that being said, if you want, buy just old school metal leaf rake, or they even have collapsible ones that we sell. I shouldn't say we, but that are sold for wildfire specific. But a metal leaf rake, if you had a metal leaf rake, a broom, and for some forestry hose, that's going to get you 99% of your brush fires. All the other tools and equipment, are nice to have. Some places buy it because they're a little busier, but generally speaking, that's all you really need.
I had one question, and for those of you, if you try to ask a question, I apologize. I had the chat locked for some reason. It should be open now. Someone asked about the helicopters. How much of that was your coordination? Meaning you have multiple helicopters flying now. Did you have to coordinate that, or did the FAA do it, or how'd that work?
So my aviation skill set is like near zero. I know how to call in a single helicopter for an airdrop, but as far as what we ended up doing, and I had mentioned earlier, so the state of Maine not only sent their helicopter, but they sent down an qualified air branch director, and he ended up basically serving as our ground commander for aviation, and he worked with the National Guard. I believe it was a National Guard captain, and the two of them basically worked out how the airspace was going to work.
Okay,
So they determined, hey, where are you going to pick up the water? What's going to be the flight pattern in and out of the fire? And they used at Hawthorne at one point, they had the three helicopters in rotation. I think for 2 days, they were all three of them worked this fire together. There's a lot of coordination with that. And to keep the operation going where you always have somebody dropping water, somebody's picking up, maybe somebody's going to get fuel, but you're never left without air coverage.
right.
That takes a lot of effort. And in the pilots, as much as talented and as skilled as they are, they're focusing on not crashing with a heavy bucket on the bottom of them. So having a qualified air branch director, basically he took care of that. And he basically served as like basically the flight controller for the area. what we did have to coordinate was with the FAA for flight restrictions, a temporary flight restriction for the area. We had a lot of challenges with that, and I'm not sure what the whole problem was, but like at one point, we actually had commercial jets starting to come into our TFR, which is our temporary flight restriction area. And we found out that Bradley didn't quite understand where it was, which was not a good situation. So that had to be adjusted. But that also keeps out that legally keeps out the drone pilots, or is supposed to keep the drone pilots out.
That's what I was going to ask was coordinating the helicopters with the drones. So
Yeah,
take that
so
away.
anytime you introduce aviation, it becomes incredibly complicated and incredibly dangerous. Um, so that person that came in from Maine to handle that was a huge help. Now, what we're very fortunate when you talk about some unique situations that played into our hand is the Maine helicopter was not necessarily didn't have to be at the Hawthorne fire the whole time. The Black Hawk and the Chinook from the Army National Guard did because that's what their orders said. So they couldn't fly a new fire without getting new orders from headquarters. So we used the main helicopter to go out and go do initial attack on new fires, go check for fires for us, and that was very helpful.
Okay.
Hope that answered the question for that person.
I think so. He's texting me, so if not, text me. Couple other questions. Uh, we talked about the hose, but dedicated forestry nozzles versus structural nozzles.
Yeah, there are out there. So this is, I'm going to throw a little old school firefighting in. And this is why fire departments used to use the adjustable gallonage
Or
nozzles.
automatic nozzles, right?
Well, not even automatic, but
Okay.
back in the day, the adjustable gallonage nozzles. So
Okay.
even, for inch and a half, you used to dial down to 15 gallons a minute. Now, the obvious challenge is you go into a structure fire and somebody set it at the wrong gallonage. You can't figure out why you're getting kicked,
Right.
in the face with fire. Like, what's going on here? And you get chased out of a room. Well, it's because somebody had set the gallonage down low. So what you're looking for is a low gallonage nozzle. The, there are specifically nozzles made for this. There's a whole bunch of different ones out there, but everybody's kind of familiar with the plastic red mystery gallonage nozzles. That's kind of like the industry standard. When we go out west, we see those all the time. I know Kochek makes an aluminum nozzle, an inch and a half. It is wicked expensive to buy a couple of those. And you got to remember, so like for me, I have an inventory of like 150 inch and a half nozzles in my station.
Right.
I can't be spending $400 on a nozzle. So we buy the plastic ones. They're like $65 a piece. But what we do use with them is a bail shutoff. So we have a shutoff with it also.
Right. Because a lot of them don't have a shut off with them.
They're like twist to shut off.
Yeah.
Um, I do know, and I'm working on getting on. I know there's that new nozzle out there that's being pushed by a few people from former FDNY firefighters, the head nozzle. Supposedly, the head nozzle was originally designed for CAL FIRE.
It
It's
was.
supposed to
Yeah.
be really good. Working to get my hands on a demo unit to give it a try. We do buy good quality inch nozzles for our program because that's what we use on our booster reels. So we use an aluminum twist to on, twist to off nozzle with a shut off on our booster lines and all our 1 inch appliance equipment.
Great. Uh, is the VFA grant going to be funded to acquire equipment?
Yeah, so we do the VFA grants went out. I don't bear with me because I that's not my particular daily
Mhm.
workload, but we do VFA grants. I believe the announcements went out for a little while ago. And you can do that's actually what we've been hoping fire departments would buy. A lot of departments were buying other stuff, and it was firefighting equipment, but not for wildfire specific. We actually have talked about amending it this coming season for the next announcement that it would have to be for wildfire specific equipment this year,
Okay.
the next go out, but that hasn't been decided yet. But yeah, you can buy that kind of stuff with it. The
Okay.
wild card there is there apparently was an election this year or something, are politically motivated people. But one of the things that came out of it is they've stopped all grants, and that includes all grants. So we're not even sure if we have money to do the VFA grant program this year because that comes through one of our that's a pass-through grant for money we receive. We have not been told we're not getting the money, but we haven't been told we
Right.
are getting the money. So more to be stay tuned for more as that unfolds.
Question, another one, and also this is well beyond my capability. I've never heard of this. Will Deep still do the forestry hose exchange? Also upgrade the Mark III pumps? And Mike, should departments expect to get reimbursed from the Berlin fire from FEMA, or is it going to be donation?
Okay, so we'll start with the hose
Yeah,
exchange.
those are
Yes.
two completely different questions.
So the hose exchange, yes, we're doing that. We do that every year. Even in a slow year, we're doing hose exchange. So
Back up, I don't even know what that is, so tell me
so
what it is.
so we will, if you have 1.5 inch forestry hose that you've used on a fire, you can leave it in the woods. We'll actually come pick up the hose and we will give you hose back in return. Now I'm gonna tell you, I it's like for like. So if there's 200 feet forestry hose you use, you're only getting 200 feet from me. If you use 300, I'll give you 300 feet, so on and so forth. And what we try to do is if you use 300 feet, we're going to give you 300 feet packed in a bag back. And then we're going to take the hose and hopefully a bag back from you. We'll take care of basically service testing it, washing it, drying it, and getting packed back up, but it goes back into my inventory. Um, the challenge with that is we've got to be that's why we try to get people to buy our spec hose because if we're going to be doing the hose replacement, not all forestry hose is created equal. And I won't say what brand it is, but there's a very expensive brand of structural hose out there that's really good. Their forestry hose is absolutely horrible. So that's why we like that Mercedes Forest Guard too. We know it's a reliable product.
Hmm.
Almost every fire equipment dealer in Connecticut has access to selling Mercedes equipment. So there's
Can we
that.
can we request more hose?
No.
Okay.
So that is, there was a time and place where that used to happen. We're not there at the moment. We have a new forest supervisor. He has a much different opinion about how we're going to handle hose than the previous forest supervisor. The challenge is I only have about 20,000 feet in inventory right now. We probably should have between 40 and 60,000 feet in inventory on each side of the state. So we're kind of short at the moment, but we're working on it. I think there will be a lot of changes this year, but we're not prepared to make announcements from deep for that at this time. As far as the Mark III pump,
Yep.
that person should get the gold star tonight because not many people know what a Mark III pump is in the fire business. So the challenge with the Mark III pump is if you have one, it is becoming more valuable by the hour because one, they aren't making that model anymore, and as they discontinued the production of it. Two, the parts for it. There are not a lot of parts left nationally, or I should say internationally, available for the Mark III pumps, which is a big challenge because that's kind of the mainstay and the backbone of wildfire worldwide. They have a new version of the Mark III. It's about 30% lighter, and that came with a 50% increase in price, which is just crazy. So it used to be a $5,000 pump. It's an almost $10,000 pump now. If you have one, you can reach out to me. We can see if we can get you parts to service it. But I have a pretty decent parts inventory now. The challenge is if it's the right parts and the parts we truly need to keep the pumps running. So we're going to be addressing that in the near future. Um,
The
and
other
then,
one was reimbursement for the Berlin fire. Does it come from FEMA, or is it going to be a donation or
well, so we do fire billing for the volunteer fire departments in Connecticut. So we have a program uh, where your area or regional fire warden would help you put a fire bill together to get reimbursed. And we have rates that we establish January 1 of every year. They're standard rates of reimbursement for fighting fire. Um, the challenge with the Berlin fire is you need to get with your fire warden. And if it's a Fairfield County Fire Department, they're going to need to come direct with me because Fairfield County still doesn't have a fire warden. Our time to put those bills together has kind of come and gone. The challenge I'm having is most of my bills are being kicked back. Um, the the fire bills this year was a dollar figure that the state of Connecticut never anticipated they would ever pay out to fire departments to fight wildfires. That being said, we're getting backstopped by FEMA on this. but the direct payments would actually be coming. So what we would do is we'd pay the bill, then we give the bill to FEMA. FEMA pays us back, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Without getting into the whole world of FEMA
Uh,
grants and whatnot,
yeah.
there's what they call an FMAG, which is a Fire Management Assistance Grant, which basically assists states that become overwhelmed with fire and can't foot the bill. The great news is Connecticut's threshold for that is so low. Just putting a helicopter into the air for a couple hours put us into that threshold. It's only $331,000 for a single fire, and it's like several $100,000 for multiple fires. We met the thresholds. Like we were right in the sweet spot to get that money. So we're actually going to get that money. The challenge is it takes a long time to get
Right.
money from. That's just the reality of the situation.
So before we and I'll open it up if anyone else has any questions and before Mike wraps up. Training, you talked about training. So what if I'm a department and I want training? What can I do? I can bring you in. What are you going to teach me? What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Okay, so what Deep has been teaching and what we've been doing as a program over the years is about a 2 to 2.5 hour program, which is a basic, we'll call it awareness level training. Because we're going under the assumption that everybody has had some sort of training through the fire academy. And the awareness level training is really pretty basic. It's basic size up safety considerations, basic wildland urban interface, some basic tactics. The the challenge is we're not sure it helped this year. So interesting. I did have a couple places where let's see if this worked because I did do some training with them back in the spring. They happened to have a fire. Some places did really well, some not so much. Um, as a program, we're talking about amending that and kind of coming up with a state standard, and we're going to be working on that with the Fire Academy, which is something our organization has not done. So what we're going to try to do is come up with a standardized training package that this is the minimum training we expect everybody to be doing and coming up with a plan to deliver it at some point. I'm not sure what it's going to look like. There is a national template. It's called the Skills Crosswalk. It was developed by the National Wildfire Coordinating Group in conjunction with the IFF, the IFC, the National Volunteer Fire Council, the International Fire Instructors Consortium. And it's basically what prior training have you had that you do not need to repeat?
Okay.
And I got the sheet here for basic firefighter skill. Normally, our training is like, so for a basic firefighter to go out and do wildland firefighting, it's a 40-hour class. Like the crosswalk is like, instead of you doing the 40-hour class, it's like eight.
Right. I
Um,
mean, the problem is too, like you go to the academy for 4 months, like it doesn't matter how much you get, you're gonna forget it because
oh,
you're
yeah.
overloaded with everything, you know. So
Oh, not tr I understand that. So,
yeah.
that being said, are we working on something
Oh
yet?
no, yeah, absolutely.
But
So
what I am delivering now is basically an awareness level training, which
uh,
is bare minimum, like basics tactics.
yeah. I mean, I think we covered a lot tonight. I don't have too much more that I had on my plate. If anyone else has any other questions out there, please put them out there. Again, I mean, this was kind of it's it's I'll call it regular stuff we go to, but it was just expanded this fall, right? I mean, it just went to a level that we have not seen, just like flooding. I mean, we go to floods all the time and water in the basement and stuff like that. And Monroe and Oxford storms were just something we have never seen before. And I think to your point, some of it was the fires, but some of it was just the amount of fires in this short period of time, right?
Yeah, and it was a saturation of starts, and it wasn't necessarily, and I might offend some people on both sides of the political view here. Climate change is there. And I'm going to say it's kind of like lung cancer. Doesn't make a difference if it's a genetic cancer, and it doesn't make a difference if you smoked a carton of cigarettes every week for the last 30 years. Either way, you have lung cancer, you kind of need to deal with it. And what we're starting to see, and this is there is good scientific evidence of it, is we're seeing the extremes, the highs and the lows are becoming quite a bit.
Hmm.
Uh, we just came off we came off, it was a 12 to 14 month record wet stretch to a flash drought that was pretty spectacular. And generally speaking, New England over the last 30 years has been getting wetter and wetter and wetter. We don't know if that's a permanent climatological shift or should we be expecting a drought in the near future? You know what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
so we have that. And one of the things I always say now when I'm teaching, generally speaking, around any of the firehouse tables, and I'm looking and I recognize some of the names and I know where your fire guys are firefighters. You guys aren't drinking coffee at the beginning of shift in the morning or on a Saturday when you're checking trucks at the volunteer house talking about forest health issues. And we have a couple ticking time bombs here in the Northeast that, most firefighters aren't going to know about. But we have beech leaf disease, which is going to wipe out beech trees here in Connecticut real quick. We already lost ash trees. There's a big fear that southern pine beetle is going to show up here in New England and devastate our pine and spruce trees. Once they start dying, they don't come back. And now they become a part of that fire load. And at some point, that carbon is going to want to convert and burn. So when you start looking at that in the future, we might be in for a few busy years. Throw on a tropical storm or a hurricane or another tornado or a macro burst that puts a lot of material on the ground and then has time to dry. We could be in for some pretty busy times coming up in the near future. Also, what everybody liked to use this year was talking about unprecedented, never had happened before in Connecticut history. That's bullshit. It actually has happened in Connecticut. So fall of 2024 was pretty spectacular. All of 1984 was just as spectacular. And kind of the sad reality is we had a fire that was at the other side of Berlin on the Berlin Southington Newington line or New Britain town line at Ragged Mountain. Similar terrain, similar quick dryness. They had a fire breakout and they had 12 real firefighter injuries and a firefighter fatality at that fire in the same town. So, we do have had these incidents before over the years. The question is,
It's been how long since, you know,
yeah, when
yeah,
the next time it's going to happen?
yeah,
It's like anything.
yeah,
You got to be prepared for your average daily workload.
yep,
Some point, though, you have to have a couple other skills because you might be called upon to deal with those calls also.
absolutely. Contact info for you. I have the email you used tonight. Do you want to give me a different one?
Hold on, let me share my screen here, if you don't
Okay.
mind. Give my,
I know we didn't even do that at all tonight, but
but it's here. Let me.
oh well. I thought it was. I thought we got through everything I wanted to, and hopefully everyone that walked feels that way as well. But Mike's gonna share his screen so you have all his contact info.
See.
There you go.
There you go. There's my contact info.
So he is the Western deep fire control officer, and then there's an Eastern one. But I assume if someone here is on the Eastern side, they can email you and you'll get them in touch with their guy.
Yes, and if you have people from adjacent states that are looking for their fire control people, we do have their contacts.
Okay.
We can pass it along. I got a couple slides here for those who are still here. Um, this is fall of 1984, worst outbreak in 25 years. This was a slide deck. Some of these slides were from a slide deck I did for Waterbury area chiefs last spring. You could see this was just, Waterbury, Naugatuck had big fires. And then there's the Ragged Mountain fire. Um, that was also the last time we used aviation here in Connecticut to fight fires. We had two Sikorsky, the Erickson Sky Cranes now. We had two of those and a Black Hawk in Connecticut helping us that year. Um, one of the things we also had when I talked about alignment this fall, not only did this flash drought show up in the fall, but the leaves were dropping. So some of our fires took multiple days to contain because every day the leaves would drop and the fire would continue to spread on us. So we had to put the line in At some of these fires, for almost 2 weeks, somebody'd have to go out every single day to put a leaf blown line around these fires to keep them in their box. That was from Berlin, and this is not my photo, but this was the reason I use this photo is I was in the upper, basically right-hand corner of that. When this photo was taken, I was in the process of sizing this up, and I was on that upper right-hand corner. And I'm going to be honest, if this fire had burned out of sight in Connecticut, what I mean out of sight is when I was in that upper right-hand corner, I looked across the fire and could see the Capitol building, and I knew that that was going to make it a challenge in itself. Um, if this fire had been burning in the northeast or the northwest corner of Connecticut, probably would have gotten no attention.
Hmm.
Uh,
Interesting.
this was in Reading. This was an initial attack photo from the Reading chief. Uh, Power lines down. We didn't even talk about causes of fires, but early on, the causes were a lot of them were campfire, surprisingly. And I think that just happened to be that the fall was such a weather was so beautiful this fall, the Aurora Borealis. Everybody was out this fall enjoying the forests of Connecticut. We had a lot of campfires starting fires. But as the season progressed, we had a lot of power lines causing fires. That was Oxford. Um, Looks spectacular, that fire. If nobody had shown up and did nothing, it wasn't going to get that big. Um, And this one, as we kind of wind up here, this was the fire I was afraid I was going to have. And this is, if anybody knows where Mohawk Mountain is, this is from the top, and I'm looking due north, and that's the fire burning at Butternut. Um, what you're seeing is that was the first day that fire really did push, and it went from 100 acres in the first operational period of the first day to the next morning, it was over 1,200 acres. And the smoke was blowing all the way down and actually was blowing enough over the Sleeping Giant State Park that people thought Sleeping Giant was on fire because of the amount of smoke coming over the top of that mountain. And generally speaking, this is where the fires were this year that were reported to us. The irony is we had 605 fires reported to deep. Uh, Generally speaking, we know that's an underreporting by about 60%. So realistically, we probably had about 1,800 fires in Connecticut this year.
Wow.
Uh,
Crazy.
and if there's one thing, we'll talk at the educational part. And this is a slide I'm gonna, as we kind of approach our spring fire season, and as much as we see snow on the ground today, and we're expecting a little snow tonight in the next couple of days, we're actually kind of behind this year on snow. I think they said we're at about like a 10-inch deficit in most parts of Connecticut. Keep this in mind. That first beautiful spring day, we were like, yeah, I'm wearing shorts and this is going to be just a good day to be outside. That's probably also the day we're most likely to have a pretty spectacular fire. Um, Anytime in the spring when they use record temperatures, the word record-breaking record temperatures and low relative humidity, that's a watch out. Um, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but the last 2 weeks of April and the first 2 weeks of May is when the trees, the living trees and shrubs and grasses are all at their driest because what they're doing is as they're getting ready to leaf out and grow, they're using a lot of water, which leaves them pretty dry. And when you get down to the bottom there, follows disturbance. Anytime we've had a major weather event that's knocked a lot of trees down, uh, whether it's a tornado, hurricane, ice storm, usually about the window is 6 to 8 years. And at the eight, that's about when like you should start seeing fires. And we've had a couple major weather events about 6 and 8 years ago now. So definitely time to start paying attention to that. Let's see. There we go. But if anybody has any last questions, Dan, if you're still there.
No, I think that was great. I got the chat window. No one else has added anything, so I guess that's a success.
Well, I'd
Mike,
like to
thank you very much for joining us. I took a lot out of it. I hope other people did too. And again, I'll post this on my channel so people can watch it after. But thank you very much.
Hey Dan, I want to say thank you. And you've known me for a long time, and this has been my soapbox for a long time. And and I'm gonna be, and I guess the big takeaway for all of you that are left, as much as you think you're prepared for the big game day, some days you show up to play the big game and you get punched in the face hard. And I'm gonna tell you, on that Monday, October 21st, that morning I'm like, yeah, it's game day. I'm gonna dial it in. We're gonna make things happen. And by midnight that night, I got punched in the face real hard. And then Tuesday, I got punched in the face. And Wednesday and Thursday. And it was like 6, 7 days before there was enough help that I'm like, okay, I can get a nap, I
Yeah.
can get a meal, and I can kind of get dialed in. I'm gonna tell you, when you're into that operational period, and for any of you that are here, I remember like Hurricane Sandy. There was a lot of us that were working. That was kind of the same thing. It took a few days to kind of get your
Catch
feet
up
under.
here.
So
And
that,
for all you say, I mean, almost everyone's still here. So
no,
you
excellent.
did good. Thank you very much.
Hey,
And everyone, thank you all for joining. And we'll see you in a couple weeks for our last one of the year. So, Mike, thank you again.
thank you. It was good seeing you all. Thank you.